Disclaimer, trigger warning. The We Are One podcast aims to shed light on the abuse experience within the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church. The stories shared are from survivors who bravely recount their personal experiences. It is important to note that unless an abuser has been convicted in a court of law, they are presumed innocent until proven guilty. The podcast does not serve as a legal judgment, but rather is a platform for survivors to share their truth. Welcome to the We Are One podcast. Let's jump right into today's episode. Here's your hosts, Olivia and Jennifer.
Welcome back to the We Are One podcast. I'm your host, Olivia.
And I'm Jen.
And on today's episode, we have our guest, Cindy. Hello, Cindy.
Hi.
Hi, Cindy.
Hi.
So I know like me and Jen have talked to you on the phone, and so we kind of know a little about you, but let's just start with, how did you guys get in the IFB, how old you are, all of that.
I'm 61 years old, but we were going to a Presbyterian church, and I was real little, so I don't remember what happened, but through the course of hopping around trying to find a church that was a good fit, my parents met some people that were going to a Southern Baptist church, and when we joined it was Southern Baptist. But years down the road, the preacher quit. We got a new preacher, and he took us out of the Southern Baptist convention, and all of a sudden it was all about rules and, what you couldn't do, and, to be a Sunday school teacher or sing in the choir or work in any capacity of the church, you had to sign an agreement with him or with the church that, there were certain things you weren't going to do. And I don't know, the church just took a big dive, and I was probably preteen when this started happening. But then as I turned a teenager, I got real rebellious, rebelling against all of this stuff. And so it was the preacher who suggested to my parents that I go to Roloff. And the preacher had gotten his pilot's license, and he knew somebody that had their pilot's license and owned a plane. So my parents paid for a private plane to fly me from Lincoln, Illinois to Corpus Christi, Texas. And my preacher was the co-pilot, and I don't know, it just, nothing was about the love of God, nothing was about God's mercy, God's grace. It was all about rules and what you had to do. And I don't know, still to this day I have trouble with kind of understanding that God is a God of love, not a God of wrath. That, if you make a mistake, he's not going to strike you down, or he's waiting to punish you. That's his goal, waiting for you to mess up so he can punish you. And
yeah, that's what a lot of us were taught. And so I have just a couple of questions right where you're at in your story. How old were you at this time?
I was 16 years old when I was sent to Roloff.
Okay. And just from speaking to a few of the other ladies that were sent also to the Roloff homes, were you drugged at all to get onto the airplane? Okay.
Oh,
Did you have to... Did you have to wear anything like specific clothes or anything at the airport, or for them to know it was you type of who you were or whatever?
No, they were afraid. They were afraid that I would run. So my mom was glued to me. If we went to the bathroom, she went. If I went to the bathroom, she went with me, et cetera, et cetera. I wasn't out of their sight. It was a private plane, so it was just the pilot, the co-pilot, our preacher, my mom and dad, and me. So between the four of them, you know, I never tried to run. I mean, I was rebellious to a sense, but
I have a question. So you said it was a private plane. That's actually the first time we've heard so far with, you know, our survivors saying that they went on a private plane and not just like, you know, the basic economy plane or whatever you want to call it. So do you, and I'm assuming you got sent to the Rebekah Home, or was it?
Yeah, it was
okay.
Rebekah.
And do you remember what year you got sent to the Rebekah Home?
1979.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, we actually spoke with somebody else.
Christian Alamo. That happened with a Christian Alamo.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
and we'll deep dive in that, and you know, because that was a huge thing. So talk with us about when you got off the plane. You know, you guys landed in Corpus, Texas, or whatever, Christie, Texas, and talk about what was it like pulling up to, you know, because I mean, we've already heard like how they had, you know, a lot of security in that way or whatever. Can you talk about what it was like pulling up to the Rebekah Home?
It's kind of fuzzy. It's been a lot of years, but I remember somebody picking us up at the Roloff airport and, you know, driving us up to the Rebekah Home, and just the size of it, it was so huge. And walking in, and like, you know, they took your stuff, they took it in the office, they went through it, they decided what you could have and couldn't have, and you know, your parents got to take home what you couldn't have. It was overwhelming. You know, I thought I'd be there till I was 18. That was what I thought. And then later I found out that I probably would have been there for a year. I guess that was the normal. I know there was some there a lot longer, but I think the normal was you signed your kid in for a year. Well, I signed in the middle of March of 1979, and whenever that Alamo happened, that was in June sometime, I got to go home. My parents came, and if your parents came, you went home with your parents. But if your parents didn't come, I don't know what happened to those girls, because I think they shut them down, didn't they?
Yeah, so they shut them down, and just from you know, looking at newspaper articles, news clips, even you know, all of the things that came out, and looking at like factual stuff. Basically, from my understanding, the girls who did not have, you know, their parents to come get them, or, you know, basically had to stay, they actually traveled to another home for time being. So when you got there, obviously, you know, they went through your stuff. They were trying to figure out what you can have. Do you remember what you couldn't have? Like, do you remember what like your parents had to take home?
You couldn't have pants, you know, blue jeans, any kind of pants. I know they took anything that I think had alcohol in it. You're afraid you were going to drink it or something. Oh boy, it's been so long. I remember after I was there for a while, all of a sudden they decided us girls were wearing too high of heels, and they just come around and took our shoes. And I think I had tennis shoes left. That's all I had left. And it's like, you checked me in, you approved this stuff, and then after my parents go home and I have no way to get shoes, then you're going to come around and take my shoes. And it was just crazy. And I remember being in lockup once. Now, if you get sent to lockup, you would think, even all these years later, you did something severe enough to go to lockup, that you would remember what the offense was. And I don't even remember what the offense was, but I think I was there for 24 hours. And I remember Lester Roloff talking to us or about us from the pulpit in his sermons. And he talked to us and about us like we were dogs, just put down. We were the lowest of the low. And I don't know, that was humiliating. And so that goes right along with narcissism. You have to humiliate people, put your foot on them, hold them down. So I don't know.
Did Roloff make you, or did anybody make you like come up with a story like you're a drug addict or you were a prostitute or stuff like that? A lot of the different survivors we've talked to said they kind of had to have like a story that they would tell.
No, but I wasn't there that long. If I would have been there long enough to maybe go on tour with them or something, maybe I would have been made to do that. But my story was simply that I was dating somebody behind my parents' back that they forbid me to, and I had lost my virginity to this person, and I was smoking marijuana. And so that's what I got sent to the Roloff Home for Girls for. It's like, really?
I look back and I'm like, thank God my parents didn't, because what? I went through a wild stage, so that's nothing. But
which that goes back to the preacher. The preacher that influenced them, that, oh, she's rebellious, oh, she's out of control, oh, she's smoking marijuana.
And also I think it's just a generation thing too. Back then there wasn't that many other type of resources or anything compared to what we have now. And I do believe that Lester Roloff, with the narcissist behavior that we have all seen, whether you listen on his radio show, his sermons, or just simple clips that you see, he is a true narcissist. The way he talks about women in general is disgusting. We are not second class, nothing about that man is godly, at all. And it saddens me, and I know it saddens Jen, when we talk to survivors who got sent there in one of, the homes or whatever, or just in general, really, when people abuse God's name in the way of for evil and their personal gain. And that's what Lester Roloff did. The more we talk with survivors, the more you do research, it's clear as day. Like, he's a narcissist, and that's a lot of it is in the IFB. These men think that they are superior because they look up to people like Lester Roloff, and they hear these sermons, and they idolize, a lot of idolization. And it's like, no, let's not do that. But they do that definitely back then, because he was one of the ones that was, I could say, like a rising star in the fundamental lifestyle. He had multiple planes. He had, multiple houses. He went toe to toe with the government. Like, he was this huge person in the IFB. So when you see that, and these men, they get money and power hungry, just like we've seen it with Jack Hyles, these people want to, well, heck, if they can do it, I can do it. And it's really damaging to so many people. Definitely, vulnerable people who are out there just genuinely thinking that these people are godly people. In reality, they're not. So when I have a question, so you said that you went to one of like the locked in rooms, I think is what you said, basically. Yeah. So another survivor went into, she basically said it was like, she went into the room or whatever, and they gave her like half a peanut butter sandwich and some water for like the day. And there were sermons just playing. And we have seen this tactic throughout other ranches and homes. It's, it's psychotic. Like, they make you like break down. They want to break you down
Yeah.
What was it like for you in the locked-in room?
I don't remember what the meals were like that was brought to me, but I just remember there was no furniture in there. There was some kind of a mattress on the floor, and I think there was sermons playing because there was intercoms in all those rooms. You could never have a private conversation while you was there because you never knew who was in the office and which room they were listening to. And so there was intercoms, and it worked both ways. They could play stuff or they could listen. So I'm sure, I mean, I don't have vivid memories of it, but I would guess that, yeah, it was Lester Roloff. And shortly after I got there, girls were talking about an attempted murder that happened there like 6 months before I got there. And a group of girls got, like, for lack of a better term, a nerdy girl, you know, a weaker girl, and they ganged up on her, stabbed her, and instead of taking her to the hospital, instead of calling the police, they did none of that. I guess from what I was told, they treated her right there until she was able to go home, and then her parents come and got her. And as the girls got out and they started talking about it, I just always assumed that the whole Alamo thing was because the more girls that got out and the more girls that reported it, then the more light it brought on Roloff and what was going wrong there. It was just so wrong. And you were talking too about the mind manipulation and the breaking down. We called it brainwashing, and I don't think memorizing the Bible is a bad thing, and I don't think memorizing the Bible is brainwashing. But when you make everybody congregate in a room and you all chant these Bible chapters, it was whole chapters we had to learn. And I remember when I first got there, I thought, I'll never know these, never. Well, before I left, I knew all of them, because when you sit and chant them, you learn them.
Yeah. Where he stands up there and he's like, "Hey girls, Psalm 119." And then literally they're Psalm 119. And then it's like the whole choir, basically Rebekah's choir, is chanting it. Or it's just like, they really want you to sound like robots, honestly. They break you down to that way. And no, I don't think, studying and obviously knowing scripture is a bad thing, obviously. But in that way of making you do that and then twisting it for your own personal gain, I think is completely wrong. And we see that as time goes on with other people and their homes and stuff like that. And it's sad because most of that is damaging to one's walk with God, as we keep on running into, me and Jen. So we actually talked with another survivor, and she said that she never once saw Lester Roloff's wife. Did you ever see her? Did she ever come to church or anything?
No, I think they always claimed she was sick, that there was something wrong with her, that she wasn't able to. So no, I never did. And I heard rumors that he had affairs. And I remember one night, we were all in bed asleep. They woke us up. We had to go stand in the hallway. We didn't know why. But somebody had wrote a threatening letter to somebody else. And they never did tell us the whole thing. But we had to stand in the hallway, not touching either wall. You could not lean. You had to stand right there in the middle. And we stood there, and we're going to stand here all night until whoever did this admits to it. Well, we'd stand some more. And then they started taking us a few at a time to the office, and we had to give them a handwriting specimen. So they, at that point, I guess they were handwriting experts. They all of a sudden become experts. So, I don't know, at some point, I don't remember anybody saying, oh, it was me, but we were finally all allowed to go back to bed. But some of the most bizarre things, it just, and after I first talked to you ladies, more memories come up because, you don't think about it for years. You try not to think about it. And then when you do start talking about it, then little memories will pop up. And
yeah, I can totally understand that way. There's times where like we'll be in the middle of an interview and they bring up something and I'm like, wait, you guys did that too, type of thing.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, but I'm curious to know like so 2 questions. When your parents dropped you off, what was that experience like with them being there? Because a lot of the women that we talked to, their parents just were like, there you go, drop you off at the airport and see you later. So they were there dropping you off. How was that? And then how was it after when they picked you up? What was your relationship like with them at that point?
when they dropped me off, they did spend the night. Like, I had to stay there. I think they spent the night. I think they called it the Helper's Home. I can't remember. It was a building next to Rebekah or close to Rebekah. I think they spent the night there. I had to stay in the Rebekah building, and they come over to say goodbye, and it was stressful. I couldn't believe it. And I didn't know at that point. Later, they told me, and I mean, I've never known them to be liars, but I was told that they had to sign guardianship over, that the only way that Rebekah could keep us is if they had guardianship of us. So my parents literally signed me over to these people.
I heard that it's bare minimum 6 months. There is the contract that they gave, that was a thing that they basically, you had to sign over your rights to them.
That's just so crazy to know that your parents signed you over to these lunatics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Right.
No, I get that.
I remember I got care packages. Sorry, bit my tongue. I got care packages from home with shampoo, conditioner, feminine products. So, I didn't have to just use what they gave us. My mom and dad sent me stuff. So I guess I was kind of fortunate in a way, and that they actually came and got me. I could have ended up who knows where for how long. And so I was lucky. And
did you ever have like a conversation with them though, like about like, what the heck, Mom? What the heck, Dad? Like, why did you listen to the pastor? That place is crazy,
For the longest time, I had very deep, bitter resentments. And on the anniversary of my admittance to Rebekah Home, oh my, that was a horrible day. I was bitter. I was angry. When I came home, they tried to be even stricter and get down on me even more. And I finally just got to where I wouldn't even speak to them. I spoke to them when they spoke to me, and I had to answer, and I answered in the fewest words that I possibly could. And that drove my mom crazy. I know it probably didn't hurt my dad, but it hurt my mom. But, I despised these people at this point because of everything they had done. And they just followed the church so blindly. And I don't know, it was years and years and years later, my dad had already died, but my mom finally came around to seeing that that might have been not a good thing that they did. that might possibly have been a bad thing, because for years they thought they did the right thing. They thought they did tough love and they did the right thing.
And did they continue to go to that church where the pastor urged? They continued for like the rest of their life, or was it for a few years? Or
until my dad passed away, still going to that church, and he was a deacon. Well, he had been sick for about 5 years before he died, so he might not have been a deacon when he died, but he was the deacon there for years and years and years, or a deacon. My mom went there until the preacher retired, and she continued to go there, and she's still alive, but her health is bad. She has frontal lobe dementia, and so she's in a home. She don't know any of us, but by the time that preacher retired, that church had just about turned into a cult. Everybody followed him blindly. They did whatever he said to do. You know, if he said jump, they'd say how high. You know, he did no wrong. And it's hard to deprogram. You've been told all your life how bad you are and what a sinner you are. And we all are sinners. But to have somebody put you down and put you down and put you down, and they crush you, and they get you to believing that if something bad happens to you, then it is a result of something you did, because, you know, God's punishing you. You know, bad stuff don't just happen. You know, if you're a Christian, then bad stuff happens if you've angered God. And it's very hard to unprogram yourself. And judgmental. Oh my goodness. My mom and dad's famous little cliche, because I went to public school. So I would come home and I would say, so-and-so's having a birthday party. Can I go? So-and-so's having a sleepover. Can I go? Nope. They don't live how we live. They don't live how we live. And it's like, well, how do they live? How do you know how they live? Have you been to their house? Have you spent any time with them? You don't know how they live. You're looking at them and judging them without even knowing them. And that's the way the whole church did. You know, if you wore pants, no, you were a horrible person. If you went swimming in public with the opposite sex present, you were a horrible sinner. If you went to the movies, you just go on and on and on about all the insane things. I mean, you know.
No, I mean, we touched base on with another person that we have interviewed with about the spiritual abuse within the IFB, and it is I think by far the worst thing somebody could go through, because it's so hard to unprogram that in your brain, to rewire your brain, because most of us have been born and raised in the IFB. This is all we've ever known. So it's hard to be like, when somebody says to us, well, you know it's wrong, so just don't look at it that way. Okay, but when you've been told your whole entire life that no, this and this, it's very hard, and it takes a long time. And some people probably still will struggle in their life in the way of like, wait, yes, I know that this was taught to me, and I believed in this a long time ago, but you know, I don't anymore, or something like that. It's very, very hard. And it's something that a lot of people in IFB realize. They know it. They know what we're saying. You know, we look at it and say, okay, yep, could never go to the movie theaters, couldn't do this, couldn't do that, because you don't know who's going to be there, and you don't want to give that false reference, you know, to look like, you know, you're them or whatever. You always have to stand out. You have to look different. some people get so caught up with like looking different with just dress code, but you got to be different in your whole lifestyle in the IFB. But what's funny is 98% of them don't live up to those standards. They live double lives. They are hypocrites. They are liars. They are liars. And I can guarantee you, I would proudly and confidently say that probably 80% of IFB pastors have more skeletons in their closet than atheists walking around Walmart. So, I don't know. And
amen to that. Amen to that.
My aunt actually made a comment, and I mean, I know that she listens, so she'll get a kick out of this. But when she had joined my former church, we were talking about this, and she said that she remembers looking at my former pastor and saying that my ungodly friends, that you're saying, my sinner friends, are more nicer and loving than these people in this church, And I was like, wow, that's really good, because it's true. You hear these pastors in their sermons talking about, oh, I had to look my head down at Walmart because did you see what that lady had on? Instead of walking up to her and saying, hey, can I invite you to church?
Yeah.
It's completely judgmental. And it's and we talk about this with somebody else, being judgmental is just human nature. That's just what it is. But they take it to a whole other extreme. Like, I really believe that most of these people in the IFB believe that, like, the way that Mormons believe, like, I'm going to bring up Mormonism real quick. They believe that there's different levels of heaven and, this kingdom's going to be able to go and this, whatever. I think in the IFB, they think that their IFB church is going to be the only church in heaven, and everybody else is just like, I really do that because, like, my former church.
Some of them do. Some of them do. Yeah,
my former church 100% does. I will gladly say that. They believe that there will be light-ass Baptist church in heaven. Everybody else better get their little, and I'm like, that's not, no. And there's quite a few people in the IFB believe that there's different levels of sin. They believe that, right? They'll say, well, all the sin's the same, but then they make excuses for everything. Mm-hmm. Unless if you're gay, immediately gotta go, you're the worst person ever, you're gonna set this church on fire.
Immediately, no, straight to jail.
Yeah. You are,
you're not collecting dollars.
If you are gay, immediately it's like, yep, you burning, and it's like, okay, like, whatever. And then, or you have somebody doing something, but the pastor's allowed to embezzlement money, cheat on his wife,
get pornography. Let's just say that one, because that's a big issue.
Yeah. So it's just, I don't know. It's so oh gosh, it's hypocritical. As someone who's been doing this for a while, I just see the patterns, and it's like, the more that we talk about it, the more they can deny it. I bet 100% most of the people that listen to my podcast that know me, they're probably like, dang, she calling me out. Yes, I am calling you out. I am calling you out. And
my own preacher that I grew up with, his wife didn't ever come to church. Once in a blue moon. And I always wondered why. Is it because he had such high standards for his congregation, and the bar was so high, and everybody's eyes are on the preacher, the preacher's wife, the preacher's family? Was it too much stress? Because after he retired and become this traveling evangelist, she goes with him everywhere, and she's the picture of health now. And it's like, what happened? What happened? But it's strange.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is strange.
That is strange. That's not really, that's usually strange, because even, granted, and I've said this before, my IFB church growing up was pretty light compared to others. Like, my pastor never smashed a TV on stage or had a, rifle in, pointing at people, aka Jack Hyles did that. But yeah, psycho, like literally psycho. Or like when he came out, nobody really stood up and like, ooh, he probably wants people to. Everybody thinks that man's God. But anyway, given that my church, I felt like it was pretty light growing up. There's so much trauma. And I'm like, I can imagine going to extreme IFB because I really would be like truly needing a lot of more help. And so I always, when speaking with survivors, I feel so bad because I'm like, you see you're thriving, you're doing better, you know what I mean? Like you're good or whatever. And I'm like, I cannot imagine being sent there, like, you know what I mean? Like, or just even in general, like the things that people go through. I think it's just a generation thing. Like, honestly.
Every time I would get in trouble, and in trouble, I mean, I don't mean with the law. I don't mean a felony or even a misdemeanor. I mean just getting in a little bit of trouble, doing something they told me not to do. Or anyway, whenever I got in trouble, they'd drag me to the church, to the preacher's office. And he'd always ask me, well, what's wrong? What's wrong? Why do you act this way? Why do you do these things? And I couldn't answer that question. And, you know, I was probably in my 40s before I realized, gee, a child can't tell you what's going on, even a teenager. But I had an abusive husband that used to call me names and cuss at me. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh my God, this is how my dad made me feel. This is exactly how it feels like I'm getting a low voltage electric shock. It's like that anxiety that I don't know, and it sent me back there going, how can a teenager put that into words? I was 40 years old before I could identify my feelings, how I was feeling. But when you're called names and put down and screamed at and, you know, I don't know. And you expect your child to be perfect, you know. There's no perfect.
Now, there is no perfect child. You're right. And, you know, really what you're explaining to us is pretty standard teenage stuff. I mean, a lot of teenagers, you know, lose their virginity when they're teenagers, and a lot of teenagers experiment with, you know, marijuana and stuff like that. Is pretty basic stuff. And like you said, you know, you didn't get hauled off to jail, or, you know, you weren't doing anything against the law. But I'm just curious, like when you had that thought when you were 40, like, oh my gosh, like this is how my dad treated me. Was it just like an epiphany that you had, or were you like in therapy and then that came out in therapy, or how did that happen?
I wasn't in therapy. It was just one night he was screaming at me, calling me names, and I was having that uncomfortable feeling again, and it was like, this is how I felt when I was a kid, and my dad was doing this to me. This is how I felt. So, and that's when I started realizing that I was in an abusive relationship too, that this wasn't right, this wasn't normal. But I stayed for years. I stayed until I will have ongoing mental issues the rest of my life. I was in therapy for a long time after I finally left him. And I still to this day have feelings that someone's trying to hurt me. Somebody doesn't like me. Somebody wants to do something bad to me. And those paranoia feelings, well, I had to protect myself from him for so many years. And I stayed so long that I will never be, quote, quote, normal. I will never be how I was before him. But he reminded me of my dad.
Have to break that cycle. And I know exactly what you're talking about because I was in an abusive marriage too. And I explained this on a few other episodes before that, like, I was going to therapy and getting help from a professional, but ultimately I had to couple that with hypnotherapy. So I was going to my therapist on a regular basis, and then was referred out to another professional that did hypnotherapy. The combination of the two really helped me break that mindset and that cycle. And then from that point on, I was no longer, getting into abusive relationships or having abusive friends. I was able to spot it like immediately in somebody's character and just completely be done. Like, okay, I'm not even going to go further with this. Even with friendships, I've done it with, like, where I see like that pattern or an indication that a person is like that. And I'm just like, I don't want anything to do with that person anymore. And now I'm in a healthy relationship, but I would just encourage, like, keep going to therapy and maybe even consider hypnotherapy. I was a little freaked out about it at first because I think, like, hypnosis, you're taught, especially in the IFB, like, that is like, you're messing with demonic stuff at that point. This is like, new age woo woo, like pseudoscience, whatever. And you're just inviting the devil in and all this stuff. Like, all this stuff is in my head, But I thought, I need to break the cycle, and nothing was working. I mean, the therapy was helping, but you got to break the cycle. So I was willing to try just about anything. And that was the one thing that did. And I never felt like, I told myself, if I go in there and I start to feel like uncomfortable, I'll just be like, okay, time's up, I'm leaving, but I didn't. And it's an interesting experience, and it was like the best thing for me. So something to consider. I mean,
I've been single for over 10 years now, and I have tried to date, but I'm always looking for those red flags because I've had enough training, I've been to enough therapy, I've been to enough women's centers, and I'm looking for the red flags, and
same.
I find them, huh?
I said same. I mean, oh Lord, I've had my doozies. And I think I always go back to the way that my father treated my mom. It triggers me when, like, oh Lord, and I've said this before on the podcast. I used to get triggered so much by my former youth pastor, the way he would talk to her growing up, how wrong and how rude and disrespectful it is. And I've seen it, right? So I would get triggered a lot, and people, even like people my age, they would look at me like, oh my gosh, like, it's not that big of a deal. But to me, it was, because I saw firsthand. I saw the real world, and I also saw the IFB world. And I think that helped me because most of my friends in the IFB completely sheltered. So to them, that was normal. Like, oh no, that's what men are supposed to do. And I'm thinking, no, I've seen the real world. Men are not supposed to do that. So like, for me, I get the icks very, very easy because I'm like, you are not going to manipulate me. Like, for me, I always get triggered in some way with my father. And it's because he's a narcissist. He is. And if there was a therapist out there, not even a therapist, a psychiatrist, I'm telling you, they would say he's bipolar. He probably has a personality split. It takes 2 seconds for, literally psychotic. And then 2 minutes later, he'd be laughing, cutting up like, no, I'm sorry. You just cussed us out. What do you know what I mean? Like, the switch, like, it's crazy, and it's not normal. So if you're out there and you're experiencing that, it's not normal. No matter how old you are, if you're like a teenager and you see that you're even like women can do that, if your mom or dad are doing that that is not what love is. That is not at all healthy. And so, like, for me, I've stated it so many times, I feel like, in season 2, but like me, I'm breaking those generation things. And so whether that means I would stay single for the rest of my life type of thing, because but I'm not, like, I'm just not, it's not worth it to me, because at the end of the day, like, I don't know, I love myself too much to be dealing with that. So, and I've seen it. I don't want to bring a child in this world the way that I was brought up. So I don't know, I stay away from it. until there's somebody out there. But people always say, like, man, you get like the icks really bad, or like you trying to see the red flag. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then
I'm not going through that again.
No. And I think also the way we were all raised in this high strict cult. I mean, you're thinking it is very hard. It's so hard. Like, I honestly wonder how many people like in the outside world that know me personally and they know this podcast, like they listen and they're like, oh, that makes sense why she was like that. Or, oh, that makes sense why she did those things. Because back then I stood whatever I wanted. I mean, I was bad. I was
my mom and dad was married for about 47 years, and to hear my mom talk about it, she had the best marriage. Oh my gosh, it was wonderful. She had a good marriage. It was miserable. The whole house was miserable. I mean, my dad come in from work screaming, and he screamed for at least 30 minutes. You know, nothing was right. The rug was kicked up, the water's dripping, blah, 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 you know, and it was a miserable household. But she's still, I don't know if she's just delusioned or, I don't know. To hear her talk about it still, well, before she lost her mind, but to hear her talk about it, it was just the perfect marriage. And it's like...
So when you all were at church, okay, so I'm envisioning your dad being like this tyrant during the week, and then everyone gets their Sunday best on and they walk into church like a cute little family and they sit on the pew together and everybody's lined up and perfect.
You're literally describing the way my childhood.
Yeah. Is that how it was?
My dad was a miserable human being. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He didn't joke. But when he walked through those doors at church, he was laughing with the men. You know, he was joking around. But at home, he was miserable, a miserable human being. And I do believe he was a Christian, and I do believe he's in heaven. And my only answer to that is he was an alcoholic. But my mom put forth the ultimatum: you either quit drinking or I'm taking the kids and I'm leaving. And back then, I'm sure there was AA or whatever, but for the sake of his family and his children, he just quit drinking. And he found the Lord, but there's a terminology called a dry drunk. Like when you don't quit for you, when you quit for somebody else, or because somebody else gave you an ultimatum, then you're a miserable person and you're a dry drunk and you lead a miserable life. And that's what I think happened. And I also think that my grandparents abused him just like he abused us. Yeah. Generational.
I feel like, I mean, granted, there's an age gap, but I'm shaking my head every time you say something because I'm like, that was my life. Yep, that's my life. Yep, that's my life. And so it's like one of those things, like, how can you look back at your childhood and you have all these memories and then say, like, this person's a good person? Like, it's very hard for me to do that. I used to always defend my dad because it is my dad, right? Like, I'm half of him, but you can't defend somebody when your whole life is pretty much a lie, you know? And so that was something that was really hard for me. And it drove me crazy when we would go to church and it was like Jen said, you know, were you that family? Yes, we were that family. But like 10 minutes before walking in, you know, he done cussed my mom out, or it was our fault because we were late to church because, you know, I didn't tie my shoes fast enough. Like, it was always somebody else's fault and not his. He has never taken accountability. I will never get that accountability that I want. I've accepted that. I'm 24 years old and I have accepted that those wishful thinkings will never happen unless literally God. And like, I mean, honestly, and I just don't really hold on to that hope. I really don't. It's hurt me in the past. And, you know, to cut ties with him completely was my decision. Had nobody else's influence. It was my decision for my own mental health. And I talk about that throughout season 2, too. And I make, posts on my private social media too about some of the stuff. And it's so annoying. I mean, Cindy, didn't you find it annoying when people would shake his hand and like cut up with them and make jokes, and you're just thinking like, this isn't where is this person? Yeah. Yeah.
And as a result, I mean, until I don't remember how old I was probably in my late 30s, going into my 40s, before I realized how wrong they were, because my parents were never wrong. They were never wrong, ever. So I raised my children the same way. You don't spank until you absolutely have to. You scream at them. You say things you shouldn't say, because that's better than spanking. And, that was the only 2 options, verbal or spanking. And I could have been a better mother. I mean, there was times I was a very good mother. There was times I was not a good mother. And one of my daughters she wants to blame everything on me. Well, I could try to blame it all on my parents, but after I got to be an adult, it was my choice. And I made wrong choices, just like she made wrong choices, but I didn't make those choices for her. She had the ability to make a different choice. She was an adult with children of her own. And my other daughter, she realizes that, and she realizes that she's not been a perfect mother either. And so, what am I trying to say here? We learn how to be a parent by how our parents raised us. And if you don't know that what they did was wrong, you can't break the cycle. But if and when you realize what was wrong, then it's your duty to break the cycle, to change the cycle, to not let it keep happening over and over and over again.
Yeah,
what am I trying to say,
I get what you mean, and
Yeah.
I think it goes back to something that I struggle with, right? So, like, a lot of people have said to me, definitely like just people that know me personally, nothing IFB related, but they're like, for you to have such a strong relationship with certain people, or like definitely your parents, like, how do you not resent them? And it's hard. It's very hard in the way of like, you know what? Yeah, they were adults. They didn't, like for me, my parents weren't raised in the IFB. My mom came on and talked about how she had different type of churches backgrounds with going with like her mama and stuff like that. So I always look at them like, honestly, I can't blame and say like that's how they were raised, because they weren't raised that way, but they were raised in certain ways that they had like disciplined me or whatever. But like growing up, like I never got to meet my dad's parents. My dad's parents actually passed away when my parents had just started my mom took care of my grandma, Mary. She had early Alzheimer's. And so my mom actually, in the beginning of my parents' relationship, actually was her caregiver. And so I never got to know them. But obviously you hear stories about the way that they were acting or, did stuff or whatever. And my mom always said she knew immediately something wasn't right with my dad's mom. But to him, it was well, no, that's my mom. That's normal. But it's no. So I always look back and I'm I often wonder with my dad, how hard his parents were on him. What was my dad's discipline? What was my dad, whatever, all those things. I look back and I'm thinking, what made my dad turn into a monster in that way? And I had to stop doing that because kind of like what you said, Cindy, eventually you're an adult, you have to make your own decision. And I stopped doing that though when I started taking care of children, and I would watch the way there's times where I'll talk in a higher tone and I immediately fix it because I'm no, they're little, they don't understand. or it's like sometimes I realize that my tone can come off a certain way. And I'm like, I don't want to be my father. I don't want to be that person because I know what it's like on the other side to get that. And I don't want to be I don't want to be the person who is sending that message when I've already had that message before, if you get what I mean. I've been the receiver on the other end, and I don't want that. Right. So it's very hard. I mean, it really is hard to get out of that mindset. We can say, you know what, my parents were traumatized or traumatized kids, right? I can have compassion for it because they created traumatized children too, because they didn't realize it. I can have compassion, and I also can have my trauma too. And I was like, yes, I can say that my parents failed me because my parents failed me in a way that they didn't realize what, you know what I mean? Like they were traumatized as children in a way, maybe. But also, I just think also it goes back to following blindly within the church of things.
Well, our preacher would preach from the pulpit. He would give you ideas on what to use to where you weren't going to leave marks, so there wouldn't be no questions raised at school or daycare. Or he preached Hot Wheel tracks. He preached the little rod that turns your blinds, opens and closes your blinds, that little plastic rod. Yeah. He preached wooden spoons. They preached, this was a traveling evangelist preached, but if they're up in the pulpit preaching at your church and you're condoning what he preaches, then it's like you preaching it too. That when you're potty training a kid, don't lay him down on the bed and use a warm wash rag. No wonder you can't get them potty trained. You take them out in the backyard, hose them off with the garden hose, and I mean, the stupid stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and I feel like, they get, they get extreme. We've seen it firsthand, whether we are talking to somebody who's been through that or we just see it in the news. I mean, there is psychotic people, and there's going to be psychotic people in this world because it comes back to free will that God has given us. When people say, why does these evil things happen to me or happen to us or whatever? It comes with free will, and it's just one of those things, unfortunately, like we'll never understand, Yeah.
And I think, like you said, it's generational too. Like when my dad was growing up, I mean, spanking and screaming, and that's how I learned. So when I had kids and I hadn't distinguished that what they did to me was wrong because, everything they did was right. They were perfect. So my mind hadn't distinguished yet that was wrong. And I'll never forget the first time I heard the term verbal abuse. I laughed, but it is abuse. And, I regret, how I disciplined. But as I said, I did a lot of good too. I was a good mother. They had the best clothes I could afford on their back. They had hot meals in their bellies. They had a nice place to live. We went on vacations. I loved them. I spent time with them. I played with them. I didn't just scream all the time and spank them all the time, but that's the part they remember the most. They don't remember the good as much as they remember the bad. People tend to remember the bad more than they remember the good.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
What is your relationship now as far as like with God? Do you have a relationship with God at this point? Do you go to church anywhere? Tell us about that.
I go to church. I don't normally miss a Sunday, and I have a daily prayer life. I wish I could say I read the Bible every day, but I'm dyslexic and I have a hard time with comprehension, so I can sit there and read. And when I get done, I can't tell you anything I read.
What you read.
The Bible's even worse because, it's hard to understand anyway, so you throw in comprehension problems and flipping things, it's hard. So sometimes when I feed my spirit, I feel closer to God. When I don't feed my spirit, then I can feel myself regressing, pulling away. So to feed my spirit, I listen to Christian music, or listen to a preacher. I love listening to Charles Stanley and, what's the other guy? David Jeremiah. I love listening to him. So I'll listen to sermons here at home. And then my church only has church on Sunday mornings, and they have groups that meet on Wednesday nights in people's homes. And I go to that sometimes, but it just, I don't know, it feels funny. I have a hard time.
Is it a specific, is it a specific denomination, or?
No, we're non-denominational, and most of this congregation is made up from survivors of that church that we grew up in. And
wow.
Now, if you could, go back in time and, after everything that's happened to you in your life, if you could go back in time, would you? And if you would, what would you change? And then if not, why wouldn't you?
I would stay married to my first husband. He was the father of all my children, and I would determine to make it work. And I would be a better mother. That's what I would change. Yeah.
And I mean, I know, like, my mom, when we have these hard conversations, she's like, I stayed, I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting you in the way of, we were always busy. We always did sports or some activities because, she never wanted us to be around that. She took the abuse and protected us from it. But in reality, we saw it, we were around it. And like I said, just, you can protect us for as long as possible. But when you get older and you see it firsthand, it does something to your brain. And I know she gets choked up because she always says, like, I failed you. I felt, whatever. And I'm like, no, you didn't fail me. And, looking back in reality, my mom is a victim of abuse, a domestic violence. She is. And I think she knows that. Like, I think she realizes that, like, those things were completely out of her control in that way, because she always says, well, if I would have left, then he would have gotten custody. My dad, like, growing up, like, we had money. That was no secret. That's why I hate money, actually. I've seen it firsthand what money can do to someone. Money hungry is so powerful. It's disgusting. They say money is the root of all evil. It really was in my family. My dad had successful car businesses, so money growing up was never an issue. And so my mom was like, I didn't have that. My mom was dependent on him. And so that's why my mom has made it instilled in me. You are not to depend on nobody. You are definitely not to depend on no man. You are supposed to be independent, whatever. And so I think that's also why I am the way I am, because I've had that in my ear. Like, don't, she always like, don't be me. And I'm like, but I want to be, I want to be you because I think you're so great. You're my best friend, whatever. But I also understand when she says that because she wants better for me. So as someone who, has seen that and goes through that as a daughter, it's hard. And my heart goes out to your daughter who, like you said, doesn't really have a relationship with you. I pray and hope that one day she realizes that, unfortunately, you did not break the generation cycle. It's one of those things, and you can't go back in time. And, and if you could, you literally said, if you could, you would be a better mom. And I really hope and pray that if she were to ever stumble upon this, that I understand wholeheartedly, I could understand both sides of it. But what people don't realize is you're on here announcing to the whole world, you're taking accountability. You realize that I did do mistakes. I was not a perfect person. Nobody's perfect, but you took accountability. And for somebody coming from someone who wants a parent to take accountability, I admire that and respect that from you, because I know that pride gets in most people's ways and, well, no, I didn't do that. So for you to come on and take accountability and say, you know what, I probably wasn't the best mom. Yeah, I did do things or whatever. I admire that, because coming from someone who wants that from their parent and will never get that. So I really hope and pray that if your daughter ever stumbles upon this, to realize how lucky she is to have actually a parent to take accountability for it. And I'm hoping, and I'll keep you in my thoughts and prayers, that, you know, your relationship can be mended. I truly believe that there's so much hope. I've seen firsthand what God can do for relationships and families. And I just think it is admirable in the way that you are taking accountability. You're fully well aware. And that's hard, because most people like me, we don't get that. And so I really hope and pray that if your daughter ever stumbles upon this, not to say ignore whatever her feelings or emotions or trauma that she might have. That's not what I'm saying. You can feel those emotions. You can have those traumas 100%. But just know that if your parent is out there taking accountability for their actions in the way that maybe caused you trauma, hold on to that, because it's very rare and you don't get that often. So
one thing I tell them all the time is change what you didn't like, because I did change, even though maybe I didn't see everything my parents did that was wrong. The thing that affected me the worst was the strictness, and I tried not to be strict, and I tried to let them have a normal life instead of the weird IFB life. I tried to not be strict. And so I told her, I said, I changed what I felt was the most important to me. And I didn't realize, you know, the rest of what I was doing, because that's how I was raised. That's all I knew. And I told her, I said, so you have to take what I did that you didn't like the most and change it. And before you know it, a couple more generations down the line, you know, our family will have corrected a lot of our dysfunction.
yeah.
So do you have any advice for anyone that's still within the church that's maybe experiencing abuse within their home or within their school or whatever? Do you have any advice for a person that's experiencing that's still within the church?
If it's an adult, God's not a God of hate and punishment and judgment. God's a God of love and mercy and grace. And you need to get out, because it's a long road to change the way you've been programmed. So don't stay any longer. Get out and start making the change. And if you're a teenager or a child, all you can do is hang in there until you get of age to make your own choice. Mm-hmm. And I went back as an adult for years because I wanted to please my parents. I wanted to gain their approval. I wanted that pat on the back. I wanted that I'm proud of you. But you could never attain that. That wasn't attainable. So get out now, and if you're not of age, when you become of age, get out and start experiencing the love of God, the mercy and the grace, because it's a whole lot better than the wrath and the anger and the judgment.
Absolutely. And I think that with the IFB, they do focus a lot on the wrath and the judgment. And it really turns people off. I mean, we interviewed one lady who was talking about this very thing, and she was talking with a coworker of hers, and her coworker didn't know that she was a Christian. They just happened upon the conversation, and she was like, wow, well, you know, if more Christians were like you, maybe I would be a Christian. You know, she was just kind of surprised because she was such like a cool, non-judgmental person. And I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And I think that people want to focus on Old Testament. Now, God is obviously the same today, yesterday, and forever, the same. But the stories of Jesus are very non-judgmental. Like, he's interacting with sinners and hanging out with the woman at the well, who obviously went during a certain time of day to avoid the town people because she didn't want people talking about her. And he didn't condemn the woman that was caught in adultery. I mean, I think the church has it wrong, and we need to focus on the love of Christ and, like you said, the grace and mercy that he offers people. And we need to remember that if we're Christians, we've been redeemed by the blood of Jesus Christ. We are now joint heirs with Jesus Christ. Do we even know what that means? Like, we are royalty. So
and we need
us,
to extend to others the same mercy and grace that God extended to us, And I made it through this whole thing without crying, and you had to ask the question that made me cry.
My last question for you, Cindy, is if you could go back in time to that 16-year-old girl before you went off to the Rebekah Home, when you were kind of in your little normal rebellious streak that a lot of teenagers do, if you could go back to that girl in time and you could give her a word of advice, if you could tell her something, what would it be?
Oh boy, that's a hard one. As an adult, I found out that a lot of the kids I went to church with were faking it. I thought they were goody kids, and I thought that I was the rebellious kid, and that they didn't want to hang out with me because they were the goody kids. They weren't the goody kids. They were doing stuff, they were just sneaky about it, and I was out in the open. I was like, I'm not going to hide this. I'm not going to be a fake person. And I didn't find out until I was an adult. But so I think, oh gosh, I would tell that rebellious teenager to tone it down and try to make it through. Try to think about why you're acting this way. A lot of mine was acting out because of the strictness I was going to show them. And you don't have to show anybody anything, if you don't like the strictness, if make it till you're 18 and get out. I got out when I was 18. I planned for it. I was so sick with the flu on my 18th birthday, but before bedtime, I got up out of my bed in their house and I went to my bed in my apartment. I spent my 18th birthday night sick in my own bed in my own apartment, and I could not wait to get away from them. Did I love them? Yes, I love them. Do I still love them? Yes, I still love them. But I hated the way they brought me up. So my advice would be not to fake it till you get through it. Just to try to control yourself. Try to not end up in a Rebekah Home, and definitely don't end up in jail or prison or juvenile detention center. I mean, just bide your time and try to make good choices and try to focus on why you're wanting to do these things. Is it just rebellion? I didn't like pot. That's one of the things that got me sent to the Rebekah Home. I never even liked the high off of marijuana. I hated it. I did it to fit in. But that's one thing that got me sent away. So maybe think, are you doing it to fit in? Well, you shouldn't have to do anything to fit in. So anyway, that's the best one I can think of.
That was a good answer. yeah, I think that's important too. Like, you were 16, so you could go back in time to your 16-year-old self and say like, hey, just chill it for a couple more years. We're almost there, and I know it's hard. Teenagers, the peer pressure, they want to fit in, and then, you went to public school, right? So then you had your church friends and your school friends, and you're kind of like torn in between, and you knew the church friends were doing it too, but nobody was, new. So, I think that,
And what that does to any parent listening, or any child listening, when you compartmentalize your life, you don't realize that you are forming very bad relationship skills. Like, we went to church and I had church friends, but we drove like 30 minutes to get to this church. So, when we went home, we couldn't socialize with those same kids because they lived far enough away to where it wasn't convenient. So then we went to school, then we had our school friends, but they don't live how we live. So you couldn't really form a good relationship with them and a strong friendship, because you were only allowed to be their friend when you were at school. So your life is compartmentalized and there's no deep relationships. And then you're bitter and resentful to your parents because you're rebelling against this lifestyle. So you lack the personal, the relationship skills to build a long-term deep relationship with anybody. Does that make sense?
yeah, totally makes sense. Yeah, that's interesting. Wow. You just kind of blew my mind there for a second, because a lot of times you don't think about that. I mean, it actually brings some memories to my mind as well, because I had school friends and church friends, and you're just kind of being tugged both directions. That's interesting. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Do you think that there's any hope for the IFB churches, and as far as like any kind of like reform or anything that the IFB churches maybe could do to
No, because an IFB church is being led by a narcissistic pastor. Because they wouldn't be an IFB church, they would be a Southern Baptist, or they would be
fire the pastors, fire the pastor.
yeah. You're an IFB church because they don't want anybody over them. And if you're in an organization, if you're in the Southern Baptist organization, if your church is in that group, then there's still a higher authority than the preacher. There's a board, there's a church government, and God is over the preacher, of course. But in the IFB church, those are narcissistic preachers that want to interpret the Bible and make new commandments. Thou shalt not wear blue jeans. So that's why the IFB church can never change, because there wouldn't be any need to be independent fundamental. I mean, there was so much fun to be in the Southern Baptist Convention. We went to other churches. The youth groups got together. We had fun together. We had conventions, something. We had GAs and RAs, and we had a good time. But when you have to have total control, you can't be in something like that, because you have a board governing you on top of your deacons, and they don't want that. They have to have total control. That's my opinion.
I think, and that's why. Yeah, I agree with you on a lot of that. I think that when some of these churches that go unchecked, and I've said it before, it's not all IFB churches. Some of them are, IFB light, where it's like they're not, legalistic and women can wear pants and they're not crazy about stupid things. But a lot of them are just straight up cults. I mean, they go unchecked. They have any authority above them. Like you said, with, the Southern Baptist Convention and some of these other organizations, they actually have to report, back to a board of people that, keep them, in check. Well, a lot of these IFB churches obviously don't have that. So, I think that's an interesting thing that you brought up. But, well, I think this was great. I mean, I don't have anything else, any other questions. I think you answered everything. I think, you're very brave to come on here and tell your story, to, like Olivia said, to be able to have that self-realization, about just, how you parented and, your kids and stuff like that. I think that's really, admirable for you to be able to recognize that. And, parenting is hard. I have 3 kids of my own. I have one daughter that's 19, and then I have a 10 and an 8-year-old. And it is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And, you do the best that you can with what you're given and how you were taught and what you were given. And there's, of course, there's books written on parenting and whatever, but every kid is different. Like, every one of my kids is different. I'm sure you can say the same thing about your kids. And you can only do what you know to do. And whatever happens after they move out and grow up is how the chips fall. And, you just got to do your best, and that's all you can do. But, I appreciate you coming on here and talking about that and us having that open discussion. And Olivia, you sharing like your situation and how it relates to what Cindy went through. And I think it's really important to have the discussion about parenting and growing up and the generational, things that we go through, that these patterns that need to be broken, and how we can break them, and what we can do for the next generation. And it's just such an important discussion. And I think even with people who are listening, who are still in the IFB churches, we're also talking about like the generational patterns that are in the IFB churches. They need to be broken. If the IFB church wants to survive, you need to take a really good hard look at the past, at the history of the IFB, and at the current state of where your church is. And if your church is very legalistic, and the pastor gets up or has other pastors in the pulpit that are harping on the women, that are telling the women all you're good for is, cooking, cleaning, and having babies, like, you might want to like reconsider where you're going to church and where you're worshiping God, because it's not biblical. It's just simply not biblical. So, eventually your kids are going to resent you for putting them in that kind of church as well. I know, like I've spoke about this before, and I'll briefly mention it again. I was a pastor's daughter growing up, and there were things that happened in our church growing up, and, that my dad should have put a stop to. And he was a peacemaker, and he just didn't want to cause, any waves, and he just let people be crazy. And my brother is no longer a Christian because of it. He's an atheist. I mean, he straight up told me a few months ago he's an atheist. So, like, if you're a parent and you're listening to this and you go to these types of churches, you really need to think about the future of your family, because it could turn a 180 on you and your family could become atheists. Like, your grandkids could never hear about God. Like, is that what you want? Is it worth it to you to go to a church where they talk about women wearing pants and women need to be in the kitchen all day long? I mean, it's just, to me, it's just stupid. So we need to break these cycles, not just in our homes, but also within the IFB churches. And that's all I got to say about that until the next episode. Then I'm sure I'll have more to say.
I need to put a like literally every single time. I need to put a video of how many times I say literally, or I say yappers, and I also need to put it for Jen saying, that's just my 2 cents. She says it every time, and I always laugh when I go back to editing because I'm like, oh, she's going to say it again. Yes.
Oh, I swear.
To finish up the episode, we are so thankful to have people like you, survivors, to come on and share their experience within the IFB. I know it's really hard to talk about these things and relive these things, and I know that it can be very emotional and take a toll on, yourself going through these things and reliving. We're thankful to have you on, and, we can't wait to hear the feedback. Obviously, stay tuned for more episodes to come on for season 2. And again, thank you so much, Cindy, for coming on today's episode.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
This is video inside Fleming Island's Berrien Baptist Church in 2001. Investigators say the video you're watching is from a camera Pastor Greg Neal hid behind plants. Investigators blacked out the top of the video because they say this camera recorded 2 female church members undressing. Back in 2011, an assistant state attorney said this about Pastor Greg Neal.
Elizabeth McSpadden, but most of you probably know me as Lizzie. It's awesome to be here, you guys. It's been a hot minute since I podcasted, so it's cool.
Doing these competitions, I mean, like, we all watch Let Us Pray, that swallowing goldfish, that's legit a thing. And
yes,
I thought about
it's
that.
real. First Baptist Church. You might know us from Pleasantville Baptist Church in Iowa. You might know us from Berrien Baptist Church in Florida. And you might currently know us from Liberty Baptist Church in Indiana. So I guess I've been a pastor's daughter my whole life. I've never known anything different.